version. Oh, great. Thank you for starting the recording. Perfect. We know that this latest version of this microaggressions workshop scratches the surface in the time we have, but we hope that today it will foster continued conversations for you during this conference and beyond. Lehia, are we ready to go ahead and get into the next section, which is polls? You want to set that up a little bit, or should we just
yeah,
go
so we're gonna, so what's gonna happen, and by the way, folks, it's gonna be so much more fun if there's not that many of us, if we have an opportunity to make it interactive. But in a minute, you're gonna be seeing a poll that is gonna be coming up, and you're gonna be able to evaluate each of the statements that you're going to be seeing, and then determine whether those are microaggressions or they're not, whether you agree or disagree, or you have a series of options. So Tom is gonna put on the first poll.
Absolutely. And I was going to mention just one other thing, Lehia, that I forgot to mention. If you're willing to turn on your camera, we'd love to see your faces. We want this to be as interactive as possible. It's totally up to you, but we like that. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the first poll, and here we go.
Okay, so please take a moment to read the statement and then determine whether you strongly agree, you're not sure, disagree, or strongly disagree with whether the statement is a microaggression. And it reads, majority of the comments at the table or at the meeting are being directed towards the male parties, leaving the females out of the conversation. And we have a few of you who have responded, and kind of all over the place, and all over the place. By that I mean we have from strongly agree to I'm not sure, and some disagree. So I'm actually going to ask Tom to take the poll down and share the results. There we go. Share the results with folks, and then there you go. What we have is the majority of you saying that you do agree that this is a microaggression, and some of you saying, no, I'm not really sure, and some of you are saying, I disagree. Oh, Heather's not saying that she doesn't see the results.
Sorry, that was on me. That was on me.
Okay.
I got it now.
There.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So what I like to do is maybe take a moment and for those of you who feel comfortable sharing, those of you who said I strongly agree, I'd like to hear your thoughts about what about this feels like a microaggression to you. Help me understand. For those of you who would like to share, and I'm looking to see if I see any raised hands or anybody that unmutes themselves. It's or anybody who wants to share. You were all over the place, with some of you saying I strongly agree, some of you saying I don't agree, some of you saying I'm not sure. Anybody who would like to take a stab at sharing your thoughts?
So good morning. My name is Pamela Herndon, and I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I said I agree. It may not have been intentional, but I do think it was a microaggression. And it was just particularly leaving out women. And when you see them at the table, you don't just leave people out. You always try to bring everybody into the conversation.
Okay, so it's not as inclusive. Thank you so very much. I appreciate that. And hello, New Mexico. Ms. Brown, I do see your hand, and I see you the word.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Pamela and what she said. And I'd like to add to that I don't think microaggressions are intentional. I think they're often unintentional. Otherwise, they just be aggressions. And
right.
So people may not know they're leaving the women out of the conveation, but it's clear
they are. That's exactly right. And that's the and we're going to talk more about microaggressions and the fact that there's a lot of unawareness that happens. Before we dive into that, I do want to ask Tom to put up the other poll. We have a couple of more. I want to ask a couple of more questions and have you evaluate the statement. So is this a microaggression, proposing to add Cinco de Mayo as a paid holiday? What do you all think? And I'm going to give it a few seconds so everybody has opportunity to participate. We are getting responses with some of you saying strongly agree. Some of you, I'm really not sure. Some of you are saying, you know what? I actually feel very strongly that I disagree with that particular statement being a microaggression. So, and by the way, there are no right or wrong answers here. This is a conversation. We're having a conversation. We're talking with each other and learning from each other. Okay, so I'm gonna end the poll and I'm gonna share, I think I can do this and share the results. Are the results being shared, folks? Can you all see the results right now? Awesome, thank you so much. So we have, again, all over the board with some of you saying, yes, I strongly feel that this is a microaggression. Some of you saying, I strongly disagree that this is a microaggression, and then everything in the middle of that is part of the conversation. And I would love to hear again, let's see, hopefully I stop sharing the results. Yes, Rita, I see the hand and I see you the word, and then Steve.
Hi, everyone. I voted for strongly agree that this would be a microaggression. And I'm assuming here that this is based on sort of the standard holidays as they currently exist in the workforce, that, you know, those are the standard paid holidays, and the proposal is to add Cinco de Mayo to that. So under that assumption, given that there's many other groups that have holidays that are not included in sort of the standard roster, if you want to call them that, of paid holidays, adding this without adding the others, I think might be interpreted as, again, not inclusive, given that there's so many who are not. It's almost by adding this and not adding many of the other holidays to certain groups that are not currently included, that leaves those groups saying, wait a second, why were these people suddenly included and our groups not included? And again, I'm saying that it's an assumption that we're going on the standard paid holidays as they exist in most workplaces.
I love that. Thank you, Rita, for sharing your perspective. And I love that you're zeroing in on something that I find particularly, well, you're talking about exclusion, which I think at the end of the day, microaggressions, a better way to talk about them are subtle acts of exclusion. So look at it in a different, sort of a broader, if you will, lens. Steve, I see your hand and I see you the word. And you're muted, sir.
It's 8 o'clock in Oregon, so still waking up. Okay. I said I wasn't sure because I mean, I think I don't know enough context of how the statement was made. If it was made in a joking manner, like, oh yeah, that's a, you know, that's one thing, as opposed to this is a serious proposal made by a union during a bargaining session. It's a totally different context.
I love that. Thank you so much for bringing that that particular thought into the conversation, which is what is the context? Because context does matter, and it makes a difference. And understanding the context, having a broader understanding of the context gives us a better understanding of what may actually be happening. I think I saw something in the chat and I don't want to miss it. Okay, so Pamela had a comment. The holiday may be added as an exclusion to other holidays, but everyone benefits from the paid holiday. There you go. So there is that flip side of that, if you will. Okay, Tom, I think we have one more. Let's take one more stab at one more. Okay, so forgetting to use preferred pronouns. Is this a microaggression? Whoops. Forgot. Sorry, I didn't mean to. What do we think? Where are we? So again, from strongly agree to strongly disagree. We're gonna give folks a few seconds to chime in. All right. And again, I love this. You all are all over the place, and I'm going to share I'm gonna end the poll and share the results. Hopefully I'm doing this correctly, but again, we have diversity of thought here in terms of whether this is something that can be considered or not considered a microaggression, right? And we have from strongly agreed, some of you saying, yeah, I think that that's definitely a microaggression, and the bulk of you saying, actually, you know, I'm more like, I agree, but not necessarily strongly. And some of you definitely saying, I strongly disagree with that statement. Who wants to share what they thought in terms of whether they strongly agree or disagree as to the what about the response? Anybody that wants to share why you responded the way that you may have responded?
Leah, Rita has her hand
Oh,
raised.
Rita, I'm sorry, I missed. Thank you so much for helping. Rita, I cede you the word.
Hi, I said agree, but I think I did it in the sense of in the same vein as if somebody had a preferred name and you chose to use a different name. So if somebody goes by a shortened version of their name, for example, and you chose to use their full name, or the other way around, that they prefer to be called, for example, Elizabeth, and you run around calling them Liz. It's the same sort of disrespect towards that person's choosing of how they want to identify and present themselves, whether it's through pronouns or even, as I said, through, you know, just what you call them on a daily basis. If they say they want to be called Stephen instead of Steve, that's what you do. The same way if somebody says they want to use a they, them pronoun instead of something else, that's what you do. And so to me, because the forgetting was in quotes in the poll, that was what I kind of, you know, zeroed in on. That again, assuming that this was done as the person was aware that this was the preference of the receiving party and they chose to ignore it, then I would see that as being an aggression.
Okay. Okay, and Rita, thank you so much, and I appreciate you bringing in, you broadened up the perspective, if you will, by talking about it. If somebody wants to be called Liz versus Elizabeth, it goes along the same vein of that respect. Yes, Ms. Brown, I see your hand and I see you the word.
I love this topic, so tell me to stop talking if I talk too much.
Oh, no,
and ignore
please.
too much. I'm wondering about number of times with that, like repeatedly forgetting, if that's more of a microaggression than forgetting once, or, you know, I guess a number of times that factors into what makes it a microaggression.
What do folks think? I mean, I think, well, I say, what do folks think? And then I immediately jump in with my thoughts and opinions. What do folks think? Does it make a difference? A matter a number of times? And I want to go back to something, context and intention. All of these things matter. All of these things matter. And we'll talk more a little bit about how these things happen and why they happen. I think we
do have one more if you want. We're really,
yeah,
let's
do one
schedule.
more.
Okay.
Let's do the last one.
All right, great. Here we go.
So poking fun at someone's known condition. Poking fun at someone's known condition. Making a light joke of it. Come on, G.I. Jane, love you. Gotta see it. Is this a microaggression? Some of you are chiming in with yes, strongly agree, and some of you are no, I disagree. I'll give it a couple more seconds so that everybody has opportunity to chime in. Okay, and I'm gonna end the poll and share the results. And we have most of you saying that you strongly agree, and then all over the place again with some of you saying I disagree or I'm not sure. The making fun of poking light fun of somebody's condition. And I'm using the terminology very purposefully, light fun, you know, like I just had knee surgery and if I'm hobbling around and Tom make a comment about, oh, you know, you're, ¿cómo se dice? Walking like a penguin. Is that a microaggression? What do you all think? The deaf is silencing. The silence is deafening. Rita, I see your hand, Rita.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry if I'm talking too much again.
No, thank you.
So I had a couple of thoughts, and I guess the first thing would be if the person making the statement and the person receiving the statement are both taking it in that spirit of fun, and that's known to each other because they have a past history of joking together about all types of things, then it might be a different response than if there isn't that nature between them. And I think that then it becomes really tricky to say from the outside whether it would be a microaggression or not, as opposed to the person doing the receiving. If the person doing the receiving of the comment is offended, taken aback a little bit, nonplussed, something like that, then I think it is. And that's not, it's difficult to say. Whereas if there's that person is taking it in a different spirit of, this is my normal friendship, we always bat each other around like this, then that person will take it differently, and they know. But that, again, that's not something that I would know looking at a case example. If it happened in the workplace, I would know what the relationship is between the people, so I couldn't say.
And Rita, I think that you're getting to one of the things that, and we're going to dive a little deeper. I'm going to turn it over to Tom, but microaggressions, and we're going to define them in a minute, but like beauty, they're to the eye of the beholder in many respects. Because context does matter. And so, the conversation that I may have and engage in with a dear friend or a colleague where we know each other and there's a level of trust, it's going to taste and look and feel different than a conversation that I may have with somebody else that we don't have that relationship, and I may not fully understand the intention behind the statement, right?
Yep.
So I thank you so much for would be having a conversation and engaging in this conversation with me. This is a subject matter that is evolving and changing, and it's a conversation that I think is an important one to be had, and I appreciate the space that you all are providing for us to be able to do this. And with that, I turn it over to my esteemed colleague.
Thank you, Lee. And thanks everyone. Like Lee has said, we want this to be a conversation. One thing I wanted to just mention, we've had some people join since I mentioned this. If you're willing to turn on your camera, we'd love to see your faces. You don't have to, but we like to make this as interactive as we can. And so that really is just an option for you. So a couple things we wanted to just touch base on, and Walter, if you can go to the next slide. In terms of our ground rules today, this is not an easy subject. These are, I'm assuming these aren't going to be difficult for this group, but, be kind, open-minded, assume everyone has good intentions, and we all, I think, are in a best spirit of this sort of topic when we aren't judging and we open to new ideas. As Lee had just said in the exercise we just did, there are no wrong answers, but so many things matter: context, relationship. These are important conversations, and so all of that matters. Take respect higher, especially when the conversation gets difficult. Please participate. And I'll just say, is there anything else that you need to make this space feel safer? Please let us know right now, and we'll do our best to accommodate. Good for now? Okay, and then the objectives. We're going to try to get this done here in the time we have. Define what microaggressions are, understand the impact that microaggressions can have, and then talk about some strategies to communicate more effectively than maybe we are. And Leah, I think the next section is yours, my friend, if you're ready to go on.
Yeah,
to biases.
I just yeah, I just realized, yes. So we're gonna let's can we go on to the next slide, please, Walter? Thank you. So I want to ask everybody to take a moment to look at the statements that are here, and just take a moment and read them. And then I do want to ask yourself, have thoughts like these if not these very thoughts, but something like this. Have you ever had a thought like that? Have you ever walked into a medical care setting, seeing a female approach you, and automatically you assume that that was the nurse versus the doctor? And then maybe even said, when is the doctor going to be in? Right? The fact of the matter is that before we talk a little bit more about microaggressions, I want to dive a little bit into biases. And the biases are, if you will, the microaggressions are actually the physical representations of our biases, and all of us have biases. If you have a brain, you have biases, and I feel like part of the challenge that I have as a human being these days is to normalize the word bias, because it's become somewhat muddled and gone complicated. But the fact of the matter is that it's part of how we as human beings are programmed, in essence, in many ways, to survive. And there is a video that I want to share with you that talks about how our brain functions and how biases are created. And so let's listen in.
In Lesson 1, we learned that schemas apply to people. Without any conscious thought, the instant we see someone, we assign them to salient and chronically accessible social categories, such as age, gender, race, or profession. Once we tag someone as belonging to a particular group, our brain automatically activates a cloud of information that we've come to associate with that group. These associations then potentially influence how we think about and interact with that person. This cloud of associations includes what social psychologists call attitudes and stereotypes. An attitude is an association between a category and an evaluative valence, either positive or negative. Attitudes are like gut feelings, a general like versus dislike, hot versus cold, thumbs up or thumbs down. We hold attitudes about all sorts of things. For instance, you might have a negative attitude toward large rats, but a positive attitude toward plump hamsters. A stereotype, in contrast, is a more specific association between a category and a particular trait. When you think of the category snakes, you probably think of the trait venomous. We know that not all snakes inject toxins when they bite, but there's a strong association nevertheless. Stereotypes also apply to people. Some groups are considered athletic, whereas others are assumed to be good at math. Some groups are seen as natural leaders, whereas others are seen as natural caregivers. Take me, for example. When you see my face or read my last name, your brain hashtags me as Asian, and the attitudes and stereotypes you associate with that category are automatically activated. If you have a positive attitude toward Asians, you might smile at me just a little bit more when I approach you at a lunch table. If you think Asians are good at math, you might be a little more inclined to hire me as your accountant, but not your lawyer. If you think Asians aren't athletic, you probably won't choose me for your pickup game of basketball. We call attitudes and stereotypes biases because they represent information that diverges from some neutral point. Explicit biases are attitudes and stereotypes that you know you have because you can just ask yourself what your feelings and thoughts are and get an answer. By contrast, an implicit bias is an attitude or stereotype that you have no direct introspective access to. In other words, asking yourself for an honest answer doesn't tell you what you need to know. Where do these biases come from? Why do we associate certain attitudes and stereotypes with some groups but not others? Well, think about how you learned that snakes are venomous, or think about why certain smells or foods give you a warm feeling of home. It's through exposure in a particular context. Sometimes that exposure is through direct contact. Other times it's through secondhand or vicarious contact, mediated through stories, books, movies, social media, and popular culture. It's no different with people. Pause for a moment and think about your attitude toward Native Americans. Also, what traits do you associate with them? How did you learn all this? Was it through direct interaction? If it was more vicarious, how accurate and representative do you think those exposures were? Because we are aware of explicit bias, we're often mindful about checking them for accuracy, appropriateness, and fairness. Most of us actually strive to revise our prior attitudes and stereotypes on the basis of better information. But this sort of self-correction doesn't go on with implicit bias because we don't even know we have them. Unfortunately, there's increasing evidence that implicit biases, even though they operate invisibly, influence our actions and decisions in small but consequential ways. Still curious? Skeptical? Don't miss Lesson 3, Real-World Consequences.
So I'm going to turn it over to Tom in a quick second, but before I do, once we understand that our implicit bias, the things that we aren't aware of, are the ones that sometimes come out to play and have us act in ways that sometimes are not necessarily in line with our value system, then we can start making and perceiving, or we can start being more aware, and being able to start noticing, okay, wait a minute, what implicit biases are coming out to play here? And I'm going to give you an example that happens to me all the time. Okay. When people find out that I'm Colombian, immediately there's some kind of smart remark made about cocaine and Pablo Escobar. And it used to make me very mad. It used to really send me over the edge. I've learned with time that the exposure that people have had to Colombia is that this is all that they see, this is all they know. So that availability, that information, that's the first thing that comes to mind. That's that availability of information, and that's what's coming out to play. Now that I understand that, I don't necessarily take it personally. I don't necessarily become offended when people automatically ask that question. So now with that, I turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Tom, who's going to talk a little bit more about the nexus, if you will, of biases and microaggressions.
Thank you. Yeah, we found that it was best to try to just tie these together. You can't really talk about microaggressions without talking about bias. We want to define bias, as we talked about. And the term originated in the early 1970s with the Harvard psychiatrist Chester M. Pierce. And it was popularized by Columbia professor Daryl Wing Su to define these small interactions and the powerful impacts they have. And the definition, we're going to show another little video here, but the most accepted definition as coined by Daryl Wing Su is microaggressions are the everyday slights, indignities, insults, invalidations, and put downs that people of color experience. Dr. Su's research focuses on people of color, but over time, the microaggressions term has been expanded beyond those boundaries. Webster's defines microaggressions as a comment or action that subtly and often unconsciously or unintentionally expresses a prejudiced attitude toward a member of a marginalized group. Next slide, please, Walter. So we're not going to get too deep into these, but there are 3 types of microaggression: microinvalidation, microinsult, and microassault. But we thought a good way to proceed is to show another short video with Daryl Wing Su defining, explaining microaggressions. So Walter, if you go ahead and launch that, appreciate it.
Good day, everyone. My name is Daryl Wing Su, and I am a professor of psychology and education at Teachers College, Columbia University. I am also author of Microaggressions in Everyday Life and Microaggressions and Marginality. Today, I would like to share with you some of the harmful impact that microaggressions have on marginalized groups in our society. But what are microaggressions? Well, microaggressions are the everyday slights, indignities, put-downs, and insults that people of color, women, LGBT populations, or those who are marginalized experience in their day-to-day interactions with people. Microaggressions oftentimes appear to be a compliment, but contain a meta-communication or a hidden insult to the target groups in which it is delivered. People who engage in microaggressions are ordinary folks who experience themselves as good, moral, decent individuals. Microaggressions occur because they are outside the level of conscious awareness of the perpetrator. In this scene, Michael, an Asian American graduate student, is receiving academic counseling from his sponsor. They have a pleasant conversation. At the end of their meeting, the advisor delivers what he believes to be a compliment to Michael by stating, quote, "You know you speak excellent English," end quote. Michael is disturbed because it seems to imply that he is not a true American and that he is a perpetual alien in his own country. Microaggressions can also be delivered non-verbally through unconscious behaviors or gestures. In this scene, Jenny has finished a late night at the office and awaits the elevator. As the door opens, she takes one step forward, sees a black male rider, hesitates, and immediately clutches her purse and places her hand over her necklace. The hidden communication is that African Americans are prone to crime, will break the law, are up to no good, and will steal. Gender microaggressions occur also frequently to women. In this scene, Laura, a female manager, sits with her male colleagues in a meeting with the president. Note that the men tend to talk to one another, cut her off in mid-sentence, and that the president addresses only the males in the group. When Laura attempts to contribute to the discussion, she is oftentimes ignored. In one case, a male colleague checks his phone rather than listen. What can each and every one of us do to combat microaggressions? We need to realize that microaggressions are unconscious manifestations of a worldview of inclusion, exclusion, superiority, inferiority. Thus, our major task is to make the invisible visible. There are, in essence, 5 things that we need to do individually. First, learn from constant vigilance of your own biases and fears. Second, experiential reality is important in interacting with people who differ from you in terms of race, culture, ethnicity. Thirdly, don't be defensive. Fourthly, be open to discussing your own attitudes and biases and how they might have hurt others or in some sense revealed bias on your part. Lastly, it is very important to be an ally. Stand personally against all forms of bias and discrimination. I wrote 2 books, Microaggressions in Everyday Life and Microaggressions and Marginality, to help us combat microaggressions at the individual, institutional, and societal level. If we are to become a fair, just, and humane society, I hope each and every one of you will join me in this important journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Lee, I'm going to turn it right back over to you, but I want to talk just a minute more about a couple of topics in the video. So that the thing that makes microaggressions so powerful is that they are often invisible to the person who is doing them. The person who engages in microaggressions is not always aware that they said something was offensive or demeaning. So it could include a backhanded compliment. For example, sometimes I'm told, "You look great for your age." It could be a joke at someone else's expense, and we all saw and heard the one Chris Rock told about Jada Pinkett Smith and what transpired after that. So if we look closer at the definition of the Webster's definition of microaggression, the meaning of prejudice. So the meaning of prejudice is it a bias for or specially against something. We all have biases, as Leah talked about, strong preferences for or against someone or something, and they can be explicit or they can be implicit. And so we're gonna talk a little bit more about the impact of both microaggressions and biases in the next section. And I'm going to turn it back over to my esteemed colleague, Leah.
Thanks, Tom. And and thank you, Walter. This is perfect. So we've talked about, we first had a conversation saying, hey, are these statements, you all think these are microaggressions? And we talked a little bit about bias. Now we have a working definition of what microaggressions are. And so how do they show up in the workplace, and how do they show up in dispute resolution, and how do they show up in our day-to-day negotiations for those of us who are in the labor relations field? So I have a series of questions that I want to ask you based on the picture that you have here in front of you. So I want to have you take a moment to look at it, study it. And then I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'm going to ask you to please type your answers into the chat box. Okay. So please be prepared. And again, no worries. There are no wrong answers here. I'm an easy teacher. I'm an easy professor. So who is the lead negotiator here? Who is the lead negotiator? What do you all think? Type your answers into the chat box. Okay, Mick is telling me that the person in the red shirt appears to be the lead negotiator. Any other thoughts? Who is the lead negotiator here? Okay, Steve is saying, not really certain. Sometimes the person doing all the talking is just doing the talking. I love that. Thank you, Steve. Okay, and I have a few more things. The man on the far right, I'm at a loss on how to tell. The person in the white suit. Okay. Awesome. Who do you all think has the decision-making power? Just by looking at this picture here, who has the decision-making power by looking at the picture? What do you all think? So Rita saying there's no way to tell. Betty saying, it looks like the guy in the right in the red shirt. Any other thoughts? Who looks like might be the person that has the decision-making power? Okay. Let me ask you another question. Who are the people addressing, or who are the people paying attention to? Who are folks addressing, or who are folks paying attention to? Can you tell from looking at the picture? Annie says, can't tell. Somebody said the mediator, dude in the red shirt, lots of red shirts, person in the red shirt. So the person in the red shirt is definitely commanding attention. But let me ask you, what is the role of the lady that is wearing the sweater and the glasses? What do we think her role is? Cannot tell, but usually bad at picking up on cue, says Rita. What do we think is the role of the lady that is wearing glasses and in the sweater? Not really clear. We're not sure what her role is there, right? Well, what we know is that nobody appears to be talking to her, right? Betty says maybe she's a team member with a guy in the white suit. Maybe, right? It's really hard to tell from looking at the picture, but what we can tell is that nobody's really talking to her. And let me ask you all, what does her body language suggest to you? What does her body language suggest to you? Looking at her body language, appears to be left out of the conversation. Yeah. Her arms are crossed. She's kind of outside, feels isolated. I saw somebody, she's shut off because she's not being heard. A picture does say, a picture can in fact speak 1,000 words, right? Or maybe she's afraid to speak up. There's no way to tell. But let's go to the next slide and see if it answers some questions for us. And in this slide, we have now the lady in the blue sweater reaching across the table and in fact making that deal, closing the deal, bringing the contract home, right? So in the one picture, she seemed left out, her body language was left out and the such. But here's the thing, microaggressions do show up in very weird, different ways at the bargaining table and in dispute resolution and in just day-to-day workplaces and just taking up those pictures as a bargaining scenario. And the things that, you know, the behavioral interactions, you know, so who is addressed at the table? Who is the word directed to? Is it always to the men at the table? Are the women being taken into consideration? Are we bypassing the leaders just because we don't understand them to be the leaders, because maybe they're quiet and off to the side? Maybe they're not speaking up and taking up a lot of airspace. We don't know, we can't always tell by looking at people. And, you know, again, if we're making all of our assumptions, right? If we're going up that ladder of reference, if we're going into whatever our predisposition beliefs are about what the leader looks like at a table, who the deal maker is at a table, that might possibly get us in trouble. How microaggressions or how subtle acts of exclusion show up at the table: bypassing the chief negotiator, talking to, again, others who are perceived to be the people in power. If it's a female negotiator, then there's always the potential of comments that are being made, that are oftentimes made as with the intention of compliments, but in fact, you would not make the same comments to a male negotiator. Comments about your looks, comments about the way you're dressed, even comments about your ability to articulate the presentation of a proposal. You have to be careful with how these things are coming across. How someone talks or someone doesn't talk, and again, comments about looks. Assumptions about people's roles, you know, who is the decision maker? Who is, you know, is it the younger person in the back of the room? Just because they're the younger person doesn't necessarily mean that they're not the decision maker. So we have to be careful with that. Assuming that only females are note takers, or only females are the ones that can run out and make copies, or something like that. Assumptions about who is good and who isn't good at drafting contract language or at coming up with solutions to a problem solve idea. Assumptions about who is good or who isn't good about math. In the video that we saw earlier, the gentleman was talking about, you know, do you hire me as your accountant based on the fact that I'm Asian? Are there some assumptions that you're making around that? Who has experience and who doesn't have experience? Do we assume that the older person, the older lady or the older gentleman has the most experience, and maybe they do or maybe they don't. We don't know that, right? How proposals and bargaining strategies show up in with microaggressions, you know, again, up until very recently, there was a big to-do on the press around assumptions about who was a union leader and could they get people organized or not organized, and whether they were perceived to be articulate or not articulate. And the whole strategy was done around the perceived notion about this person's being able to organize and being able to articulate. And then that backfired because, you know, there wasn't the correct assumption, if you will. Assumptions about, you know, if you have somebody who is, and I see as a mediator, I do see this play out at the table, the perception of age, whether, and it cuts both ways, by the way. somebody who's perceived to be too old to understand technology, to understand how things are moving these days, or somebody who's perceived too young to know, what is good for them anyway. I mean, these are biases and these are perceptions, and they come out to play in all of dispute resolution and negotiations. The assumption about who is or who is not a hard bargainer. The assumption being made that oftentimes that maybe females are not hard bargainers and that only men are hard bargainers. Okay, so those are ways in which microaggressions and what I call subtle acts of exclusion show up in the workplace and negotiations specifically. Walter, can we go to the yeah. So let me ask you, I've given you some examples, but I'd love to hear from you all. How do you see microaggressions come up in your dispute resolution processes? How do you see it play out? And I'm gonna give you all a second to just think of something and please put it up into the chat room. So I'm gonna give you 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, think of something. And when I say 3, please type it into the chat box so we can all see it come up at the same time, and it'll be a chat storm. So 1, 2, and 3. Please enter. How do you see the dispute microaggressions in your dispute resolution? Sarah saying, my first mediation case, a party asked me, how old are you? Can you even really be a mediator? Yeah, yes, those assumptions are terrible. Yes, sometimes used intentionally to intimidate women being left out of decision conversations. Absolutely. Women and people who are not perceived as being decision makers. When I was a chief negotiator, they called me the kid. Yeah, and I'm sure that it was meant as a compliment. Yeah, you're so young, but that can be very jarring, especially if you're starting out. Parties questioning your ability and your capacity. All of these things play out, absolutely. In my first lawsuit, my client called me an attorney child. I'm so sorry. Absolutely, these are all different ways in which it plays out. And it's very incredibly annoying because and here's the thing, when these things like being called a child, are you old enough to do this? None of these things in on themselves are gonna break the bank, for lack of better terminology. One time that somebody tells me, Ligia, you're Colombian, thus you must be carrying some cocaine. One time is not gonna, that doesn't break me. It's what happens when it's repeated actions. And I think we have a video that comes up next that talks about that. Walter, let's see what happens here.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem,
oh, you're so well spoken.
Just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while...
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland?
Sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date...
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
Going grocery shopping.
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
Commuting to work.
So when are you gonna have a baby?
Watching TV.
We have to keep the Redskins name. It's part of our culture and history.
Or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up
Do you
everywhere.
know John? Give me shopping advice. I love Cher too.
And getting bit by mosquitoes every day,
Can I touch your hair?
multiple times a day,
So pretty. Can
Can I
I
touch
your
it,
hair?
please? Come on, please. I want to Can I please?
is annoying. And makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes, which seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares? Just another angry black woman.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try this challenging major.
Ow, my dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
You looked like you was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
That's the impact day in and day out potentially of being mosquito bites coming in and mosquito bites coming out. Absolutely very annoying. I'm gonna, I believe, turn it over to my partner, Tom.
For
Thank
people
you,
who
Lydia. So, and the participation has been fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. So we're going to talk now about what can we do? What can I do? And the slide talks about some of them. We've described some of the ways that we've learned biases, and fortunately, we can work to unlearn them, but it takes some effort. And here are some ways to do it. So one is to increase contact with people who are different from me. We form unconscious biases based on race, gender identity, age, sexual orientation, marital status, education, and many other social categories. We also tend to socialize the most with people like us. So to break that pattern, we can interact with people outside of our in-group. That interaction will have a much greater effect if we work to form organic and genuine relationships and friendships with those people, rather than relying on casual or infrequent contact. We can notice positive examples. Research shows that implicit bias responds to current input. So in other words, new experiences can replace older data. That's the way our brain works. And so looking at people outside of our in-group, again, for positive examples can help form new positive patterns and generalizations about people from the group. Next slide, I think. Walter, thank you so much for your help here. So being mindful. Yeah,
One
go ahead and
more.
go to the next one. Thanks. Sorry. Yeah, one more.
Yeah. I got a lot of slides.
We're catching up here. Great. So we talked about changing your mindset, and also next slide is to be mindful. So implicit bias is more likely to surface when we are mentally or physically exhausted or highly stressed. It's because when we're tired or stressed, we're less effective at processing new information and rely more on unconscious patterns. So we can practice ways to increase mindfulness, such as meditation, yoga, or focused breathing. We can also practice slowing down. And before interacting with people from certain groups, we can pause and reflect to reduce our reflexive actions. Next slide, please. One of the techniques that is useful is called debiasing. And it's a way to kind of expose ourselves to individuals who occupy countertypical roles. So, for example, female scientists, Asian novelists, Latino composers. Hopefully you live in or work in a community that affords you lots of opportunities to meet, connect with, and interact with people who look, sound, and believe differently from you. And these everyday interactions are crucial in understanding the other and realizing that they're not different from us. It's important to be specific with your intent. Okay, it's one thing to say I'll lose weight. It's another to say I'll cut desserts out of my diet until I've lost 10 pounds. So the latter statement is more likely to help me succeed. So regardless of whether I'm aware of holding specific stereotypes, we can defeat negative bias by countering it intentionally. This was kind of talked about a little bit in one of the earlier videos. So there's a pervasive and inaccurate stereotype that Black people are more likely to commit crimes than people of other races. So even if we're consciously disbelieve this stereotype, we're aware of it. And a University of Chapel Hill study found that people who intentionally said the word safe to themselves each time they encountered a Black person effectively undid the implicit bias by creating a new and more positive stereotype. So another slide here on debiasing is just a pretty simple but powerful exercise we can do. I can recognize that I'm thinking, what I'm thinking comes from possibly an implicit attitude or stereotype, label it as biased in my mind, reflect on why this occurred based upon everything that brought me to this place, and then replace that with a counterexample and try to think and act accordingly. All right, Lihi, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you. And actually, there's the secret sauce in my never to be humble opinion that you're not asking for, but here it is empathy. Empathy is the secret sauce that allows us to create a broader perspective and to actually start walking, if you will, in someone else's shoes. And we have a lot of this very short video that talks about the power of empathy. So Walter, please.
The importance of empathy. We all live in our own version of reality, a reality that is limited by our senses, our temperament, and our own experiences. It is the only reality we will ever truly know, but it is crucial to our personal development, our relationships, and to society itself that we make the effort to try and experience other people's realities as well. This is done through empathy. Simply stated, empathy is an active attempt to understand another person's perspective, their emotions, and in essence, their reality. We are social animals, and our ability to communicate and understand each other's emotional states is key to maintaining our relationships. So it is little wonder that the ability to empathize is hardwired directly into our brains. One area that assists in this process is the right supramarginal gyrus, which helps us to distinguish our own emotional state from that of another person, and plays a key role in our ability to observe and assess what other people are experiencing. Studies from Neuron Science Journal suggest that we have systems of mirror neurons in our brains that cause us to mimic the actions of others. That is why when we see someone yawn, we will often yawn in reply. And when we observe someone experiencing joy or pain, we experience the same sensation to a certain extent. But these reactions are primarily driven by subconscious reflexes. In order to be truly empathic, you have to actively think beyond yourself and your own concerns. You can develop this empathic skill by practicing some simple habits. Be observant of others. We tend to spend the majority of our day dwelling on ourselves, caught up in our own daily routines and digital distractions. But taking the time to observe others around you is a good first step in developing your empathy. Watch and wonder. Try to focus on the person's state of being rather than categorizing or labeling them. Ask yourself, what kind of day are they having? How are they feeling? Challenge yourself to genuinely care about their well-being. Curiosity about others is the first step to expanding your empathy. Use active listening. During a conversation, especially a heated one, most people formulate their response before the other person even finishes their statement. This form of communication is more verbal combat than an exchange of ideas or opinions. Avoid this reflex by slowing down. Rather than rushing to reply, take a moment to consider the other person's statement. Ask follow-up questions to better understand what the speaker intended. Try to understand their emotional state and the deeper motivations behind their statement. What life experiences led them to their current worldview? Remember, you don't need to share someone's opinion in order to understand it and acknowledge it. And listening will help inform and expand your own opinion. Open up. Learning more about other people's experiences is a key element to seeing the world through someone else's eyes. But it is also important to open up about your own feelings and experiences. Empathy is a two-way street that at best is built upon mutual understanding. Through a combination of uncovering the deeper motivations of someone else's position and expressing our own underlying concerns, we often discover a shared commonality, even with those who hold different beliefs than ours. Through the practice of keeping an open mind, empathy helps us challenge prejudice, find commonality, and expand our moral universe. Without it, we are apt to label people outside our circle as the other, the problem, or the enemy. These labels draw lines in the sand that prevent us from moving forward or growing. It cuts us off from the realization that the human experience is a shared experience. We have much more in common than we think, and are really just seeing small variations of the same reality.
Thank you, Walter. And I'm gonna stop actually sharing the screen, and I'm gonna look at all of your smiley faces. We only have about a minute left, and I wanted to just open up the floor for any questions that you may have. This is really, truly the best way to describe this is a very broad bird's eye overview of this. It's a very complex subject matter. We barely touched on the subject, but if there are any questions or anything that you'd like to ask before we end, please, this is your moment. Otherwise, you do have all of our contact information through the app, the Lyra.
Looks like Sarah has her hand up, Leah.
Oh, Sarah, please. Thank you.
Yeah.
Leah, Tom, I'm wondering if you have resources that you could recommend on how people can stand up for microaggressions when they see other people sort of having that for other people to stand up for it. Because I know that we say that, but oftentimes, like when I've seen it and I've stood up and said it, it's harder than I think we give credence to. And so I don't know if there are scripts or things that people have seen that have been really effective as opposed to just stop that. And so I was wondering if there are, and I know Laquetta and I have talked about this as well, right? Laquetta, about providing scripts, about helping people say, if you see something, say something. As a way to help.
That's a great question, Sarah. And I don't have a ready script. That's the answer to your question is I don't have one. I do, and I also, and it's kind of this weird, this is Ligia from my personal point of view, only that of mine. It's a balancing act because I don't always want somebody to stand up for me. So so I don't know what the answer is. I think this is why I'm saying this is a subject matter that requires so much more time. I do see Betty's hand. So Betty, I want to cede you the word.
Oh, thank you. I was just thinking one way that is maybe easier, less threatening. We've all been in meetings, I think, where we've seen some of those table situations where it looks like either one person's not getting a chance to speak or one person's not being listened to. Maybe it's the woman and maybe the men are having their little three-way conversation, but to speak up and say something such as, and as Loretta was saying, or as she said before, that's a very good answer, and maybe Tom repeated it, but you want to make sure that Loretta helps to get some of that credit. That might be a safer
Thank you, Betty.
option.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. The amplifying the voices of the other ladies in the room. That's absolutely wonderful. And the one thing that I always, my go-to standard comment when I hear things that are questionable to me is like, that's interesting. What makes you say that? Or tell me more about that. And it's non-threatening, and it stops them in their tracks. In that, what does make me say that? Why am I saying what? It causes people to stop and really think through what it is that is being said. Hopefully that's helpful. I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for being here. I think we're a few minutes past the 9 o'clock hour, or the end of the time, but thank you so very much.
Thanks, everyone. We really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yes. Thank you so much, everybody.